Hello, I'm Chris Hartwell, and welcome to The Heartbeat, the place where I talk about just a few of the things that make this little guy tick. Today, I'm going to be talking about Spectre. Join me, won't you? Alright guys, here we go. James Bond returns for his 24th adventure. Yes, 24. This time, though, it's a cryptic message from 007's past that pulls him back into the field and on yet another globe-trotting mission to uncover yet another secret organization, this time called Spectre versus Quantum. Back home in England, M, who is James Bond's supervisor, kind of battles the bureaucracy to keep their secret service alive, and back on the field, the deeper James Bond digs, the more dangerous and personal things get, until ultimately things climax to a big action set piece where stuff blows up and people die. Spoilers, sorry. And though I do jest about such things, in my opinion, it's not the redundant plot elements that make this film bad, nor any film bad. Whether it's a James Bond film, or a Marvel film, or an Avatar film, I'm actually not bothered when I see a familiar story, so long as I can feel the unique, invested, passionate hearts and minds behind that specific retelling. So, I say we examine some of those familiar Bond elements and assess how Mendes and company did at presenting them on this specific film. One of the things we've all come to expect from a Bond film is spectacle. And yes, when it came to locations, set design, costumes, and cinematography, there was absolutely a smattering of really fun and distinct work on display in Spectre. The opening set piece in Mexico specifically, where they literally had thousands of extras for Mr. Craig to walk through, and this really elaborate 5-minute tracking shot did an excellent job of drawing me into the story. Throughout it, I could genuinely feel myself leaning forwards, like the longer the shot went on, the more taut the proverbial bowstring felt like it was being drawn until boom! Things erupted. Also, there's a really beautiful, picturesque train ride that Bond and Miss Swan take through the countryside, which was also where one of my favorite action scenes took place, which was a fist fight between Mr. Bond and Mr. Hanks. Speaking of action, that is obviously a very important staple for any Bond film, which is why I find it so unfortunate to now confess that apart from the aforementioned fistfight between Mr. Bond and the excellent Mr. Bautista, I found the rest of the action to kind of be underwhelming. For me anyways, I am a very firm believer that action set pieces should serve the same purpose as any other element in the film, which is to engage the audience and to draw them all the more into this specific story. Something that I thought Casino Royale did exceptionally well, especially in that opening parkour foot chase. But even as I break down that stellar action sequence, identifying some of the technical and artistic things that made it great, know that I'm not saying that every single action set piece from here on out and every single Bond film needs to try and check those exact same boxes to achieve that same success. After all, not every single action set piece needs or even wants to be an adrenaline-infused foot chase. Also, and more importantly, those elements alone are not what made that action sequence truly great. The director, the DP, the editor, and the stunt coordinator didn't merely figure out some secret formula and execute it perfectly. They did something far less definable and far less concrete, and also something far more difficult. What they did was infuse that film with such a palpable sense of enthusiasm and dedication and creativity and passion. You can really feel Craig fighting to prove himself as Bond, that being his first Bond film, and you could really feel the producers fighting to reinvigorate their aging franchise in an era when the Bourne films were kind of ruling. And it was a feeling that I also felt on the 2009 Star Trek film. In both that and Casino Royale, the filmmakers so clearly had something to prove and something to fight for, and I really believe that translated onto screen with something that felt fresh, relevant, and captivating. I even felt a measure of that on Skyfall, Mendes' previous Bond film, which he even confessed he had a lot to prove on, and felt like he needed to be very protective of his single-minded vision. And I say all that about previous Bond films, and about Casino Royale especially, because that was a film that came out 54 years after the original Bond film, and was the 21st entry in this series, and yet was still captivating, and still felt fresh, and proved that this is a series worthy of survival. Showing me, anyways, that I can and should expect the same from Spectre. But alas, it wasn't just the action that didn't feel fresh or captivating, it was kind of the whole plot line of the film. Which really bummed me out because I kept on reading these interviews with people like Sam Mendes where he promised things like, there was this collective excitement on set and a real wave of energy about everything. But I, for one, did not feel that. It really felt like Sam Mendes, along with the screenwriters, John Logan, Neal Purvis, and Robert Wade, the latter two, who actually have written 6 Bond films now, which is kind of impressive, it really felt like they were all making the same tired mistakes they made on Quantum of Solace, which is kind of mind-blowing considering how panned that film is, even by the film's producers. But it really did feel like they were so scared to leave the success of the previous narrative, whether it be Casino Royale or Skyfall, that they kind of ended up making this very strange sequel that we didn't know we needed. And as it turned out, we didn't need. Also, on both Skyfall and Casino Royale, I felt like the filmmakers were able to get away with some of those kind of fun, but more importantly, not pointless feeling reinventions of famous Bond tropes, lines, and characters, impressively actually making them work on their own. So even if someone hadn't seen a previous Bond film, moments like the one in Casino Royale where the bartender asks, "Would you like that shaken or stirred?" And Bond replies, "Does it look like I give a damn?" Or us getting a younger Q on Skyfall. Moments that aren't enjoyable solely because they're taking something that we know and kind of turning it on its head, but because they actually mean something to that specific film and to that specific James Bond. Which makes it all the more tragic when in a film like Spectre, those new reinvented pieces aren't really in any way, shape, or form used in a meaningful way. Sure, there were a few fun light moments with Ben Whishaw's Q, which kind of felt like James Bond's answer to Mission Impossible's Benji character. But when it came to Naomie Harris's Moneypenny or Ralph Fiennes' M, though the actors really gave it their all, the characters were given so little to do they ultimately came off as feeling quite forgettable. And unfortunately, the new characters weren't dealt much better of a hand when it came to Madeleine Swann. Léa Seydoux really did go for gold, but ultimately fell short as a character primarily because the screenwriters seemed so bent on aiming so high with her. The filmmakers are so desperately wanting us to believe that Bond has finally found, as one character says, someone that is perfect for him. Which I guess kind of makes sense if you follow the logic of another quote from the filmmakers where they talked about this Bond film kind of having a sense of completion over the last 4 Bond films. And so I guess, in a way, having Bond finally find his true love provides that sort of conclusion, but not really. It ultimately kind of came off as very contrived and made the character of Miss Swan, the Bond girl in Spectre, feel really unbelievable. But speaking of Bond, and Mr. Craig specifically, there were elements and hints, mind you, of something interesting going on there. I actually kind of like the idea that the filmmakers were trying to give him something of an arc over the last 4 films. I like the fact that the 007 we find in Spectre has greater wisdom and more empathy for people than he did in Casino Royale. That he could actually stop and ask himself, should I continue to pursue this life? But again, all those ideas are played so lightly that Bond's arc in this film really does come off as being completely unmemorable. And another big downside that the writers don't seem to be noticing as they've been kind of transitioning over the last 4 films, sort of returning Bond to some of his earlier silliness and jokiness, which I do really enjoy in earlier Bond films, by the way, space lasers and all. But what they don't seem to be noticing is the fact that that new lighter tone really doesn't mesh up all that well with Daniel Craig's first 2 Bond films. And though I won't spoil those specific moments in Spectre, I will point your attention to a moment in Casino Royale and a moment in Skyfall. The moment in Casino Royale to remember is the one where Vesper and Bond are actually battling this one henchman in his stairwell, and Vesper actually ends up assisting in the murder of that man. And she's so scarred by that experience, we find her in the next scene, fully clothed, sitting in the shower, trying to wash the blood off of her hands. And Daniel Craig's James Bond walks in and sits down next to her and has this really poignant, touching moment. A moment that really did contrast previous Bond films while fitting perfectly in line tonally with Casino Royale. In Skyfall, though, there's another scene between Bond and a Bond girl where they seem to tonally be starting in the same place. The Bond girl actually comes out and explains how she used to be part of the sex trade, and again, we kind of have the surprising, realistic, and deep interaction between Bond and a woman. But in that instance, the next scene has them going to bed together, and you kind of are just feeling, well, you don't know what to feel. Because a moment ago, you were over here emotionally, and then the writers suddenly throw you over here, and you have this feeling of those 2 tones don't mesh up, and this doesn't work in that instance. It just doesn't feel right anymore. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to reference Quantum of Solace a couple more times and mention a few other things that don't work for me on Spectre. On Quantum of Solace, in the editing room, it felt like the filmmakers were kind of finally realizing how little plot and narrative was actually in that film, and they kind of just chopped it up and made it as short as possible, and it's actually the shortest of all the Bond films. Whereas on Spectre, which is the longest of the Bond films, there did seem to be more of a belief in the story that they were telling, but if you look at it, there's just as little plot happening in Spectre, except in this instance, we're forced to sit through a 2-hour and 30-minute film. So really, what were they doing in all that time? Well, that kind of does bring me to my final and most unfortunate negative about Spectre, which was the usage of Christoph Waltz, who is a brilliant Academy Award-winning actor. Essentially, what the filmmakers were trying to do, and what he was trying to convince Bond of, was that he was the author of all of Bond's pain. All of the conflicts that Bond encountered in the last 4 films, all the different people that died, was all linked to the Christoph Waltz bad guy. Or at least that's what he claimed. It was almost as if this whole film was the final act of a heist film. A film like Ocean's 11, where you would expect a George Clooney character, and rightfully so, to do a lot more than just walk up to the bad guy and go, haha, I robbed you, roll credits. In the same manner on Spectre, you would think that they would return to certain moments from the past 3 films, re-examining them and allowing you to finally go, aha, now I understand what was happening there. And that didn't happen once on this film. So it was a fail on 2 fronts, really, because after watching Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, and Skyfall, I didn't walk out of any of those films going, there are a lot of big lingering questions on that film. I still don't have a handle on who did what. And also, their attempt to retcon the film fell completely on its face when they failed to actually justify or show in any legitimate way that this specific villain was behind any of those specific plots in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. So, all that to say, I wasn't a huge fan of Spectre. There were elements, there were moments that I did enjoy. Some of the action, some of the acting, some of the scenery. Bond still doesn't fall completely flat in some of those areas. Nonetheless, though, I'm going to have to give Spectre only 2 out of 5 stars. I would still love to know what you guys think, though, because there have been certain critics that I read that did rather enjoy this film, and I would love to know if you guys are one of those people. Let me know what I missed. Am I completely off my rocker? Please comment below. Let me know. Also, please do subscribe. I'm going to continue to review films and television on this channel, and I would love for you to stay up to date on all of those things. But for now, I'm Chris Hartwell. This is The Heartbeat. Thank you for joining me.